As folks are getting on, just to let you know that we have a page that we've archived all of the former lectionary studies on, and they're video recorded there. And Pastor Michael Jeanette will put that link in the chat box. We have set those up in a nice organized fashion for you. You can go back and watch if you'd like, and there's also other formation events that are located there. But we are grateful for you being with us this morning. Pastor Michael, you go ahead and let folks in. I'm going to keep going so we can honor our speaker's time with us today. But friends, I'm Kevin Strickland. I serve as the Bishop of the Southeastern Synod of the ELCA, which for those of you who don't know what that means, that's Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Alabama. And we are privileged today to have with us the Reverend Dr. Karyn Wiseman. Dr. Wiseman serves as the Herman G. Stuempfle Associate Professor of Homiletics at United Lutheran Seminary, and someone who I've come to know and appreciate. She is an ordained pastor in the United Church of Christ and grew up first as an ordained person in the United Methodist Church. She has years of experience being a parish pastor. Preaching is at the heart of who she is and what she does, and teaching is right there next to it. I witnessed her in the classroom, and she certainly is someone who brings her passion for Holy Scripture into what it means to have preachers stand up and say, "This is the word of the Lord." Dr. Wiseman, it is a privilege to have you with us today, and she and I just were speaking, and these texts for July are anything but ordinary for ordinary seasons. So we're, if you read ahead, it's an interesting thing to talk about, but we're grateful for Dr. Wiseman's place here as a teaching theologian of the church, and give thanks for each of you being with us. As I said, we have a formation page. Pastor Michael will put that in the chat box. Dr. Wiseman will lead you through this morning. There will be an opportunity for a break, and she'll share other things we're going to do as far as the teaching platform today. But I'll begin us with a prayer. And if you have any questions along the way, you can send those to Pastor Michael Jeanette, who is on our staff here at the Southeastern Synod. And Pastor Michael is the assistant to the bishop for formation and communication. So let's pray. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Good and gracious God, thank you so much for the joy of this day where creation shines around us, and yet we also hear its groaning pains. In this season that the church calls ordinary, we know that it's anything but that. For each and every day with you, O God, is extraordinary. It's an opportunity to dwell in your kingdom, to splash in your bath of forgiveness, to feast at your table of grace, and yet to show the world what your love truly is and means. Guide and direct, O God, this your servant Karyn today as she leads us in the study of your holy scriptures. Guide and direct, O God, each of us as we proclaim what it means that this is the word of the Lord each and every week, day in and day out. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Again, thank you, Dr. Wiseman. We are so privileged to have you with us today.
Thank you, Bishop. It was great to be invited to be here. I'm excited to see all of you. I was looking through the names and where you come from. I see a couple of names that I know because they're former students, and I see some places like down in Texas that are representing today. Wherever you're from, I'm so glad that you joined us this morning. A couple of things. I am going to be using some slides as a bit of my outline. I won't read them to you, but I'm going to have them there as sort of some guide. You do not have to take pictures or write everything down. I'm going to create a PDF that Michael will make available to you. So hopefully that will be helpful. One of the things about ordinary time that I'm sure those of you who are lectionary pastors know this, is that it is the least connected time of the lectionary, right? All the other pieces of the liturgical calendar are centered around these acts or these instances of Christ's life. And ordinary time is not. And so the other pieces, when you're doing different times of the year, you can link those texts together, although they're not always linked really well. Like in Advent, they threw in a Micah text for no reason, except it has the word Bethlehem in it. So let me just tell you that even when they are somewhat connected together, it's like, really? Why is that there, right? So one of the things about liturgical preaching and lectionary preaching is we're centered around sort of historically grounded events, and we're often centered around texts and themes throughout the multiple readings that are really, really connected significantly well. That's not true for July. It's really not. It's not true for ordinary time. So I thought really hard about, do I want to spend some significant time going through all the lectionary readings in case there are other folks, there are folks on here that might be wanting to do through the epistles or, reading from the Old Testament. And I thought, you know what, they can do that work. I'm going to do the work around the really difficult texts that we have before us in the gospel. And one of the cool things is there is an overarching theme to this time period, right? Not until Mark 8 and beyond do we get sort of the journey to Jerusalem. We're past the infancy stories and the beginning of Mark's gospel. We're in that chunk of gospel which Jesus is teaching through parable, where we get some historical narrative stories that are happening in the midst of the text, and those are rich moments for us to sort of focus in on what's happening in the gospel text. So please don't feel like I am, insinuating that the other texts from the lectionary are not important. I grew up in a tradition that we did the gospel text in the United Methodist Church with my dad, and we did the Psalter at some point during the service. And one of the things that I always was confused by is that we would read these strange readings from Psalms, and I was like, that's kind of bad theology, or man, that's really triumphalism, or oh my gosh, I don't like that. And so I'm part of that tradition that we basically focus in on the gospel. So that's who you got today, right? And you got me. I'm from Texas. I'm very proud of it. I on this past Sunday talked about divided loyalties and who we serve, and in a context where I am the lead pastor at Gloria Day Church in Huntingdon Valley, and I am the part-time Stuempfle professor. I'm getting a lot more opportunities to preach right now, and it's really a lot of fun. But man, I'm looking at these texts and I'm going, I'm glad I got a head start for what's happening in July, because there's a lot going on. So I'm going to be sharing some slides. I'm not sure, Michael, if there's a setup that you want to do on the slides. Here's what I think is the best case scenario, folks, is to show the speaker view. And I am going to begin to share. Let's see, let me make sure I get that going right. Technology is awesome until you have to use it in front of a bunch of people. And then it's like, let me just see if it'll work. Yeah. All right. So we're going to be preaching through July. And one of the pieces that I already sort of said is that this is lectionary conversation. This is where we are in this. And one of the things about the lectionary is that it really wasn't built as a homiletical tool. That may seem kind of strange to you, but it wasn't. It was built as a liturgical tool to help us march through the calendar. And often it has clear ties to the Eucharist. Many of those times during the year, there are wonderful ways to link passages together. But one of the things that I teach my students, and I saw that I have a few students who are on here, and I hope they still remember this, is you can only preach one sermon at a time, right? Sometimes we want to do multiple things at the same time. But what we're learning about listeners, particularly in the 21st century, and as we are, have navigated the last 15 months, is that folks don't have the kind of focus that they did 20 years ago. They don't have the capacity, not everybody, but a significant number of folks, they don't have the capacity to sort of link complex things together. Particularly in an oral format where they're listening and they don't have something in front of them to sort of go back and trace and say, oh, here's that connection, and oh, here's what I should be thinking about. There was a study done about, I think it was about 12 or 15 years ago, to determine the appropriate length of a speech or a sermon or a talk so that people could follow that and have really clear attention given to it. And they came up with between 18 and 19 minutes. This was about 15 years ago. And they did the same study about 8 or 9 years ago, I saw. And it had diminished from 18 or 19 down to 11 to 12. That if you went beyond that, most people are saying, I lost you. Where are you? Wait a minute. Give me give me an anchor so where I can go. And now they're saying that the attention span of most North American and many European folks is about the length of the ability to concentrate of a goldfish. Which is actually 18 seconds. If you didn't know that, here you're walking away today with a gem of knowledge that a goldfish can pay attention for about 18 seconds. I don't believe for a second that folks can't listen for longer than that. But the evidence is continuing to stack up against us. There was a time when movies in the movie theater got longer and longer and longer. And now those are the exception. Many have pared back a little bit. So preaching one sermon at a time, preaching in a focused way that is really about that one thing, that one element that you want them to get. The complexities of these texts, particularly during the month of July, means that if I start bringing in a whole lot of other connective tissue that doesn't really connect as well as it might, that's going to get problematic. So just a bit of a caution that I continue to think about, to teach about to my students. And I think even though you are not my students in the legal sense, you are today. We're colleagues working together. And as I said, I'll share these. One of the things that's so amazing about this set of texts is it offers us an opportunity to really focus on miracles, teaching, sending, and leading. And we get a great opportunity to do that starting the weeks of July. So you probably already know what the texts are as we're moving towards that moment where we're getting our text ready. There are 3 from the Gospel of Mark, and then July 25th, it goes to John, and there's a specific reason that it does that. So we're going to give you a little bit of background stuff around Mark, just because, as a teacher, I think I want you guys to see these connections. Some of you may already be aware of some of these, and it's maybe then just a refresher. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so Mark, from the very first words of the Gospel of Mark, Mark says this is the beginning of the story of Jesus Christ. It's not the end, it's the beginning. And as we know, the intended ending of the Gospel of Mark and the addition of the resurrection story make it clear that Mark has just given us the beginning of the story. He wants us to know, but he doesn't want us to have the whole story. He wants us to begin to think through what faith looks like, what Jesus' teachings look like. And I think one of the things that he does, a few of them really distress me, but there's some things that he does that I think are really, really good. He uses a historical present often. It's not this happened, this will happen, this is happening. That's kind of where he lays his rhetorical skill set. And in that way, it can be really helpful for your listeners to say, this isn't in the now of what's going on in Mark. Mark wants us right in the middle of that. And Mark really is an action text, right? There's some teaching that's very, very important with some parables, but 18 healing stories. And so from just sort of the data around the Gospel of Mark, we know that one of his intentions is to show Jesus actively in ministry, clearly knowing and understanding who's inside and who's outside and who he's talking to and who he's trying to persuade. And as I said early on, we're not to the way to the cross yet, but these sections right here, particularly in chapter 6, we just get some really great stuff that's going on. And, there's a lot of different writings out there about the Gospel of Mark. I'm going to be honest with you. Mark is one of my least favorite of the four gospels. I am a Luke all the way. I love Luke's justice and centered on the bringing the margins not just into, but folding them back into the center of the gospel story. I love Luke's inclusion of so many stories of women. And I come to Mark, and it's just like, seriously, no one understands who you are. I understand a secret, but the entire book, and I just get a little frustrated with Mark. But you know what? I can't preach Luke every year. I can't have a canon within a canon. I can't choose that book over all others. So one of the things that the gift of the lectionary is it makes us move outside of our comfort zone and spend a little bit more time in these different gospel texts. There actually is a movement right now within some of the liturgical academies that and some of our scholars are thinking, maybe we need to redo the lectionary and have a 4-year lectionary and have John get his own year. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but this idea that we get to focus on this one author's words, and we call him Mark because that's the easiest thing to do. We call him Mark. We're not sure exactly what his name was, but Mark is what's given to this. And from your biblical studies, I'm sure that Mark is the first gospel used. Matthew and Luke cheated during the test. They looked over on his work to copy some of the pieces, but all 4 of the gospels share some similarities and significant and glaring differences. And also in one of the stories we're going to talk about today, 2 of the gospels share the story of John's beheading much differently and with less focus on it than Mark, because Mark wants to get to the meat of what's going on there. So what are some of the purposes behind Mark? Well, obviously one of them is to encourage folks who were living under the empire to persevere. I mean, there was persecution, there was crisis. You had the fall of the temple. You have all of the history that is going on in that particular moment. And these folks they continue to wonder, okay, he said he was coming back. When is he coming back? Right? When is he coming back? I need him back. He said he was coming back. Is he not coming back? Wait a minute. Do you know when he's coming back? I have no clue. Will he come back soon? I don't know. There's all of these questions that sort of come into their existence. And how do we persevere? How do we work our faith? How do we live our faith when the person we depended on and learned our faith from is no longer with us? And I love the fact that it really shows what discipleship looks like, right? And there is so many times in the church, and we're going to talk about the church a couple of times today in general. There's so many times in the church that we get stuck just gathering. We get stuck just being together. And that's one of the things that many folks are outside of the church right now are very frustrated by, that the church is not accessible. Even now, after 15 months of being online and on Zoom and live streaming, there's still folks out there that say the church isn't accessible. The church doesn't understand us. The church is not relevant anymore. The church is too focused on, sexuality and on abortion and on, all these other issues that are going on in the world, or the church is not focused enough on the lives of our Black and Brown siblings who are really in difficult times right now and have been through the history of our country. So focusing on doing can really be one of those places this next month that you really give some focus to that and what we can do. I have a theory that if I ask a group in a room, what is your favorite gospel, that I can say something about you, right? It's almost like a palm reader. I can do a gospel reader, right? So if you say Luke, you're probably more interested in marginalized stories. You're into justice. You want to change the world, because Luke sort of sets Jesus up against the social system. right? It's that, how is Jesus combative? How is Jesus challenging? How is Jesus pushing the social norms at the time period? And so if you tell me that, I can figure out who you are. Mark, same thing. A lot of times you are frustrated by the process and the bureaucracy, and you're kind of fighting up against the political system, and how do we change the world, and how do we concentrate on that doing. And Matthew, often you're a little frustrated with the church, and who's not right now? Who's not frustrated with the church and how things are going in it? And those kind of things are important for us to remember, these overarching sort of themes. But one of the things that makes, I think, Mark unique is the way he uses immediately. There is an urgency in Mark that he wants the Christians who are under the rule of the empire to experience what it means for focus and for urgency in redeeming, in creating an environment where they feel that redemptive freedom, and they understand how they're called to live. It's found 42 times in the Gospel of Mark, 11 just in the first chapter. He often tells bracket stories, and we see a few of these during July, where he starts a story, pieces something else in, and then comes back to the story. Or it is two similar stories or two historically connected moments. And as I said earlier, he is not afraid to leave things unsaid. And I think that that's pretty cool. Growing up, though, I kept thinking these disciples are the stupidest people on the planet. And there are some quarters, there are some folks who call them the disciples because they just don't get it at times. So one of the things that I try to teach, and I want to just lay this out here today, is the importance of story and image, right? The text that we use sometimes are richly narrative in their base, right? They just are a story, and we can allow that story to really help folks relate. A lot of the parables are in story form, but they're also deeply rooted in image. And one of the things about our congregants today, whether they're online, whether or not they are, watching you from their home or from their TV, or they're up on the deck of their apartment complex, or they're out at the beach, and they don't want to miss church, and they do, but they watch it 3 days later, is they enjoy the power of an image. When we adopted our son, it was 21 years ago. And I will tell you that he has a superpower when he was little. It was a superpower unlike any superpower I had ever experienced. No matter where we were driving, he could figure out where there was a McDonald's, even at the age of like 3 and 4, when he couldn't read, but he could tell me there's a McDonald's right up there. And I was like, how can you know that? Well, there were signs. There were road signs. There were advertising signs. There was a huge glowing in the dark, yellow M, those golden arches that were there. And I thought, you know what? He didn't have to be able to read. All he has to be able to see is that M, and he knows there's a play place coming up. There's a place to get ice cream. There's a place that, we can get out of the car for a little bit. And that's one of the things that is really, really important, folks. We are a visual people. Even though our school systems and our churches often set us up as passive receptors, sitting down and receiving the information, one of the best ways we learn is through our visual acuity, the things that we see. If I ask you right now this question, I just want you to clear your mind for a second. I want to ask you this question. What is your favorite place to go on vacation? All right, now I'm going to ask Michael, if you see somebody, is there anyone willing to tell us what your favorite vacation place is? Any hands up or?
Yeah, if you want
raised?
to, you can feel free to mute yourself, unmute yourself, and we'll try to organize the chaos.
Yeah. Anyone want to answer? What's your favorite vacation place? Come on, I know somebody's got one. Go ahead, unmute yourself and share.
Go ahead, Cody.
Yeah.
Mexico.
Say it again.
Mexico.
Mexico. Okay, got it. And Christina, I see you're unmuted. I think. Where is your favorite place to go for vacation? Well, I thought she was unmuted.
It's okay. We got some people putting in the chat box here. We got Bishop Strickland says Provincetown, Massachusetts,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Robert Beekman says Block Island, Rhode Island.
Never been there.
Nickerson Lake in Maine.
Those are some cool places. All right, so tell me, or think through for just a second. When I asked the question, what happened first? What is the first thing that happened? Did you see it? Yeah, that's where our memory centers are, right? When we talk about a person that you miss, their image comes into you. We are about 96% around remembering is focused on image. There are a few folks out there who do not have images that come up automatically. It's just a sense of how their brain works. But for most of us, we need an image. We can picture where Jesus is if you describe it. We can understand what was going on the side of the hill with those multitudes of people trying to be fed, because we paint an image. Remember a picnic. Remember when you've walked up this hike. Those kind of things are really helpful. One of the things that church is sort of being called to right now, I believe absolutely, is we got to do some prophetic preaching. We've got to do some social transformation. Now that the church has undergone, in some ways, an unplanned and unintentional refocus on who we are and how we're going to be in the world. Now we see what's going on in the world, and we need to help people understand how we can be a catalyst for change as well. And story and image make a significant impact. I'm going to be just blunt with you right now. I have never had someone leave church and say, I am so glad you shared with me what the Greek interpretation was in the original documents. Just understanding, the word usage and understanding the deeply rooted connections to language, it really stuck with me. Has anybody ever had that happen, right? What we're learning from listening to the listeners is they don't care how much you know. They want to know how much you care, right? They want to know that you care for them and that you are doing this in a way that connects to our deep need of being able to visualize that. They remember the story. They remember the image. They remember the impact that those had in their lives. And sometimes we do those visually. Sometimes we do that with a verbal description. But man, it's just so important for folks to be able to connect to that. So let's start with July 4th. All right. And as we start with July 4th, I'm going to say something that my music director is angry about. And that is that I have told her every year that I have been around any music director anywhere that on July 4th, I do not want any patriotic music. I don't want flag waving. I don't want us to move the flag that's in a different part of the church up onto the altar. And I have taken some stuff for that. I have taken heat, and some of you will as well. I really struggle with the way that religion is being used in the world as a battering ram, as a expectation of excellence, as sort of a determining factor of whether or not you and your life and your faith matter, depending on how I interpret the Bible. And in America today, we're in a weird spot, and I just think we have to name it. We do not preach to all red churches or all blue churches. We preach to purple churches. And one of my first PhD students was Dr. Leah Shade, who's written a couple of books, but her most recent one is Preaching in the Purple Zone. And she talks about how do we deal with these complex issues when you have two very different experiences sitting in your pew. I did a class just this last week, and we had a student who lives in Chicago and has a church there. He's working on their DMin. And in their pews on one row, about 4 rows back, is a police officer and his family. And right behind him often sits his mother and dad. His dad is a retired police officer. They have a fairly diverse church. They live in an area where violence has erupted on a number of occasions around gang violence or just, unspecified, just gun violence. And right across the aisle is a mom who sits there every single Sunday, whose son was killed 14 years ago by a cop. And they rarely speak to each other with any depth. They do acknowledge each other as they walk by. He will nod to her and she will nod to him, but they have never been able to have a conversation. They sit in the same sanctuary on the same type of wood from one side of the church to the other. And they never really look at each other until they get up and sort of move in or out of the space. And the student said, every time I think about preaching, I imagine those two people. And I thought, dang, that's hard. I mean, it's already hard enough, but that's hard to think through that. And you may not have that dramatic of a situation in your pews, but you will have people who vote Republican sometimes, vote Democrat the other time, and folks who are like me. I grew up as a yellow dog Democrat in Texas. What a yellow dog Democrat means is that I will vote for a yellow dog before I will vote for a Republican. I have matured and I have learned that there is more at stake than just the political affiliation. But we're in a really divisive time period right now, right? And there's a lot of times when there's rejection, there's oppression, there's marginalization, there's violence. There is sort of this long-standing stream of trying to cut off people's rights and not allow them to feel the fullness. You can't be in this country and not think about the fact that our brown and black siblings, our Asian siblings, they were predominantly brought here as workers, as slaves, as indentured servants, as folks to build the railroad out west. And so the very being of who we are as we move into July 4th weekend is not who we want to say we are, right? We want to say that we're this country of the free and the brave, and we can proudly look at the flag, and not everybody feels that way. And not everyone has been invited to be a part of the country in the same ways as others. So I do this just to remind you that I want you to approach that with trepidation, with some real caution about what that means. It's an onion, and the more layers you begin to pull back, the more sort of rot and staleness that comes in the center of that onion. Doesn't mean we can't work to fix all of this, but understand the complicated nature of what's going on. And this pericope is in 2 parts. And I would like for someone to read. We're going through, as I said, the Gospel of Mark, verses 1 through 13. And I would love if one of you, and I'm going to be honest, I can't see all of you. I may just pick somebody. If you've got if you have either a Bible in front of you or you can look up the text, I'm wondering. I know JJ, would you be willing to read Mark 6, 1 to 13?
Of course, Dr. Wiseman.
All
and
right,
I'm reading from the NRSV translation.
Okay.
He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath day, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house. And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no money, no money, no belt, and no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. He said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed all that should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. The gospel of the Lord.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that's so profound in this first reading is that there are 2 sections, but they're linked significantly. They're linked by the rejection, the potential of rejection, and Jesus' actual rejection in his hometown. And I don't know how many of you have gone home to your home church and preached in front of them. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're a preacher now. I still see you as the little girl in my vacation Bible school class, or the little boy who sat on the last pew and always made noise. And I had to go, tell you to be quiet often during church. And they don't see that progression, right, of who you are. You've been to college, you've been to seminary, you've come back and they have invited you back for an anniversary ceremony. And all of a sudden they're putting you in the place of that little girl or that little boy or that rowdy teenager. And that's just a glimpse maybe of what that might feel like as we move back into those places. I've gone back a couple of times to places that I served early on, or when my dad served. He was is a pastor as well. And it does feel weird because some people are like, "Ooh, yeah, you've changed and for the better, and man, we really like your word." And others are like, "I remember you when." And in that very moment, there is a diminishing possibility of them seeing who you are and hearing you as the proclaimer of the gospel. And I'm telling you right now, your people, they understand rejection. They understand rejection. They've lost jobs. They've lost relationships. They've been, discounted, or they've been underappreciated, or they have been kicked out by their family. This is Pride Month, and I continue to hear stories as I share things on my social media account about Pride Month, but also about Black Lives Matter and about anti-Asian and Pacific Islander acts of violence and working towards a more just environment. And I just hear story after story after story of folks who've been kicked out of their families because they're trans, or they've been turned away because they're gay, or they've married a person from another race or another religion. And I'm telling you right now, people understand rejection. I mean, if you made it through junior high, you understand rejection. You know what I mean? There's no way you can go through junior high and not experience some level of rejection. You've sat at that table with 6 other girls who decided, last night on their phone call, hey, let's not like Laura today. Nobody likes Laura. All right. Don't talk to her. Just ignore her. Don't let her sit with us. Let's just punish Laura today, just for fun. This will be cool, right? No, it's not cool. Rejection sucks. But your people have experienced it in one way or the other. And I think owning that and then seeing that Jesus prepares his disciples for that same type of rejection. He says, prophets won't be honored in their hometown. I mean, the people just don't see them that way. But we're still called to preach the gospel, right? Even if someone would say, you're too young, you're too old, you're too straight, you're too gay, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too pretty, you're too whatever. I mean, it's going to go on and on and on and on. I think in the church today, not even Jesus would get accepted and have a unanimous call vote. Am I right? Am I right? Can I get a what, or a amen or something out there? The truth is, we want the perfect person. We want someone who's 25, who has the experience of a 50-year-old. We want someone who has kids but doesn't take care of them too much, because we want accessibility to them. We want someone who's a gifted preacher and a wonderful teacher, also is great at administration, can plunge toilets with the best of them, and will visit every single shut-in as often as possible, regardless of their immunocompromised situation. I mean, it's hard, right? Rejection is hard. So Jesus goes through this, and in this pericope, we get the story of that rejection, and then we get the moment that he sends his disciples, and he doesn't send them alone. He sends them with somebody. He doesn't send them without preparation. It says in the text, he said, I'm going to send you 2 by 2, and I'm going to give you authority. So he prepares them, right? And one of the things that means is that he is a leader who is making sure that they know the score, right? I am getting ready for our congregational meeting later this month. And one of the things that council asked me to do, we're going to approve congregational budgets, operations budgets, capital budgets, look at our preschool budget, and we're going to do a couple of other things. And I got an email from the executive team the other day, and they said, okay, the church is also going to want to hear from you. Could you just give sort of a state of the church, sort of 10, 15 minutes, what's going on in the church, how the church is changing, what church might look like when we come back from COVID. You can do that. And I got the email, and I said, who the heck knows what the church is going to look like, right? We glimpse it in a mirror that is completely obscured, right? Nobody knows what church is going to look like post-COVID. We know what we want it to look like, maybe. We know what we think it should look like, but none of us knows. So we have to be prepared for that. One of my favorite groups on Facebook is a group called Things They Didn't Teach You in Seminary. If you're not a part of this group, it's actually pretty funny. And in the first days of COVID, into that first month or so, I kept seeing the same thing. Seminary didn't prepare us for this. Seminary didn't prepare us for this. And as a seminary professor, I was offended. I was like, no, wait a minute. We taught you how to preach. We taught you how to teach. We taught you how to do pastoral care. We taught you how to, administer a church. We taught you how to, make, evangelism and, invitations to the church a part of who you are. We just didn't teach you the modality that we're doing right now, right? But the church is changing. It's changed over the past 20 years. Every denomination, mainline denomination that's out there that is a mainline Protestant tradition is on a downward trajectory, right? Some of the only churches and denominations that are growing are more evangelical, more charismatic, and less denominationally centered. So if someone asks me what the church is going to look like, I say, what do you want it to look like? I mean, let's not just let it happen to us. Let's begin to envision what the beloved community might look like. This is a moment when we can sort of begin to share that. So what I hear behind that question from my council is they want to understand what we need to do to prepare ourselves for the next steps. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing. He was preparing his disciples for the next step. And he wanted them to know what it was going to take to be faithful, what it was going to take to continue the ministry that they were called to. And so he's saying some people are going to accept you and some people aren't. Some people will turn you away. But don't rely on your own resources. Don't take a bag. Don't take money. Don't take, extra clothing. I trust, he says, I trust the people will care for you. If you care for them and teach them, they will care for you. And I got to tell you, if I were to begin to think, I think it's time for me to leave. If one of you was to decide, I think mutually the church and I are at a place where I don't think we can go further. For someone to just say, hey, just quit now. We have no idea where you're going to live. We have no idea, what's going to happen next, and no church is available in this synod. You'd be a little freaked out, right? We would all be freaked out. They are leaving the safety, relative safety of being with Jesus to go into a world that he's very clearly preparing them for, where they would be rejected, where they wouldn't be accepted, where their words might not matter. And he said, if you're not welcome someplace and they refuse to hear you, leave, shake off the dust that's on your feet as a testimony against them. And it's one of those moments I read that and I think, okay, wait a minute. Is he legit saying if they won't listen to you, just forget them? Doesn't sound like the grace that we understand what it means to be in community around. But, he's letting them know the truth. And I think we have to tell our folks the truth. Are we going to be rejected? Yeah, we are. We have two significant groups that are fleeing the church right now. We have the nuns that we've been talking about for a long time, and we've got a next generation of nuns who are saying, I don't like the focus of the church. I don't like that they're not very relevant. I don't feel like they're authentic. I feel like they're so focused on social justice issues or not focused on social justice issues that are important to me. And so I don't want to have anything to do with the institutional church. But we also have this rising group that is growing significantly. It's called the Dones, D-O-N-E-S. And it's folks who have been long time partners in the church that have worked in official and unofficial capacities as leaders. They have been lay leaders. They have been parts of councils. They have been wonderful participants of the life of the church who are saying, man, I've fought this for so long. The church is stuck. The church is stagnant. I need out of this. So helping prepare people is a really important part of our work in the church. And as pastors, how do we prepare people for what's next when we're not sure what's next? Well, we make sure they know what the expectations are. And that's what Jesus did. He laid out the expectations of who they are, how they're to work in the world, and how they're to move on if they can't be heard. And I think that kind of preparation is something that we don't always do, right? And, his own rejection, they knew who he was. They knew from the very beginning who he was, and it becomes problematic. So I think this is one of those texts that just gives us an awesome opportunity to connect to their own stories, to connect to the stories of our people. There are all kinds of stories out there about how many times authors and movie folks and writers sent books in to be published, and they were just, shot down every single time. I have a couple of books that I was well into the way in and thought, yeah, this is a great book. I know people will want this. And then publishers were like, nah, I don't think there's enough audience for that. And you're going to do the same thing. You're going to preach some sermons and people walk away and go, man, that was a great sermon. I really love that. And there'll be other sermons when folks walk away and they don't say anything to you. Or as they were leaving, they sort of give you that glare that shows you they weren't happy with what you said. Or they walk up and they say, man, you really stepped on my toes today. I was really uncomfortable the entire service. What Jesus wants his disciples to do is to continue to tell the gospel, to continue to proclaim the redemptive power of Jesus already, to heal people who are wounded and sick, to sit with those folks who are marginalized. And that kind of ministry, we can't do it on our own. There has to be a collection of folks who want to do that with us. And if they're not prepared to do that, then us going out into the world and having our congregations lead with us is going to be really, really hard. So I think this is one of those opportunities to talk about the changing church, to talk about what's going on in the world and how we become better prepared so that we can face those obstacles that are out there, right? And I just find that incredibly important, particularly as we face the world right now. And as we look at all of the conflict and the strife and the difficulty that's raging around us, to sort of be a voice that says, hey, we may have been online for the last 15 months, but we didn't stop being a church. The doors may have been shut for in-person worship, but the church was not closed. The church continued out into the world. The church continued to make great strides in sharing its story and being the church that folks can find online and go, wow, I didn't know I could do this, right? I didn't know I could sit at home and watch church. So here's a word of caution as the church for what it is right now. You've prepared people to receive church in a particular way over the last 15 months. If you yank all that away from them, that is not going to go well. I think we're in a multi-modal area time when we're going to be having to do a couple of different ways that happen. So let's talk just a little bit more about the sending. The sending itself involves partnership. And one of the things that I think the church has done particularly well in our past is creating groups that can work and act together. We have not been so good at those groups interacting with each other and inviting and welcoming new people into those spaces. It's really tragic, the number of churches that you can't get into a Sunday school class because they've been teaching and learning for so long together. Inviting a new person is just beyond their capacity. It messes up their chi, or messes up their balance. And I think this is that moment. We are sent forth, and we're sent forth by the example of the disciples to preach, to teach, to trust folks, to try to reach out to those folks who are marginalized, to serve, to anoint, to invite people to follow Jesus. And I'm telling you, I grew up in an era and in a state where inviting people to follow Jesus was absolutely automatic. If you were in church, there was an altar call. If you were in church, there was an altar call. And it was that invitation to Christian discipleship, that invitation to somebody to come in and be a part of our community. And I was sitting in a bunch of those back rows, a bunch of those back pews, when all of a sudden somebody, the pastor up front said, all right, I feel it in my soul. I know there's somebody sitting here right now. There's someone sitting right here in our midst who feels God's presence for the very first time, that God is reaching down and touching and prodding to go, to stand up and say, I will follow Jesus now. I declare Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. Please come. This is that moment. We're praying for you right now. Come on up. We know that you're there. And then they start singing Just As I Am 150 times, saying, we're going to continue to sing until you come forward. We're going to continue to sing until I know there's a person sitting here who's ready to come. Maybe you haven't experienced that. Man, I've experienced that a lot of times. And the youth on the back row would sort of look over at each other and say, hey, it's your turn to get saved. I got saved last time. Because it was their way to stop the singing and to move us forward. Some people are really comfortable when to invite others into Christian discipleship, and some folks really aren't. I am constantly amazed that we have the most magnificent story of salvation, of redemption, the most amazing story of faith and discipleship, and we suck at telling that story. We suck at telling that story. We have to do it better, beyond the pulpit, beyond, the narthex of the church. We have to share that. So he's sending out disciples to do that work together. And I think that's a really big piece of who we need to be into the future, partners in sharing that work together. I think that's extremely important. So let's move on to July 11th. We're going to talk about the second Sunday, and then we're going to do a group conversation for a little bit, and then take a break, and then we'll come back. But let's do July 11th next. And the Bishop Strickland said that when we were visiting right before the session, we were talking about the death of John the Baptist is one of the hardest texts in the lectionary sometimes to preach. And one of the things that is absolutely true about this text is there's some imagery that's really, really rough. So let's read aloud. If I'll get someone to read for us, we're going to be looking at, again, the 6th chapter of Mark, verses 14 through 29. And I'm looking, is there someone who would be willing to read? I can call somebody if we need to. issue is I can see the people.
I can read, Dr. Wiseman.
All right, thank you very much.
King Herod heard of it, for Jesus' name had become known. Some were saying John the Baptizer had been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers were at work in him. But others said it is Elijah. But others said it is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old. But when Herod heard of it, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it. And he solemnly swore to her, whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what should I ask for? She replied, the head of John the Baptizer. Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
Wow. Not the text that you typically preach from, right? There's graphic nature to it. There is jealousy and envy. There's revenge. There's all kinds of stuff that comes up in this text that can be really fun to deal with. But man, it gets complicated. The thing about John and Jesus is their stories are inextricably, linked, right? They're linked together from the pregnancies of Elizabeth and Mary to the childhood that they probably played together as cousins, to John's beginning ministry out in the wilderness and Jesus coming to him for his baptism. And all of these things are so profoundly important because they're linked together. They're family, they're cousins. And both of them were raising a lot of trouble. They were bringing about some significant struggle in the midst of their ministry. They weren't afraid to say, you know what, I'm going to cause some trouble. It was in their ministry that they already wanted to make sure that they were challenging the status quo, that they were rabble rousers in some significant ways. They did not fit the norm of who they thought they might be. And whenever you do that, whenever you challenge the status quo, whenever you push folks, there is often a cost to that. Right? I'm not going to ask you to raise hands, but I just want you to think for a second. How many of either you yourself or friends or colleagues that you know have left the ministry because the cost was too high? The stress was too significant. The ways that they could not find a way forward was just so difficult to even consider. And that is one of the things that I think we all have to think about right now. One of the things that I'm aware of, and as we think about seminary education in our students, that we have to prepare you to go out into the world, but we also don't want you to be lone rangers. That was a term that got used often in my seminary. They kept saying, "Oh, it's so tempting to be a lone ranger. Don't go out there on your own." And the that analogy never worked for me because the Lone Ranger had his horse, right? They were partners. He had a guide that in all of the shows was mistreated and was shown in a negative light for indigenous peoples. But none of us can do this alone, right? And the disciples being sent out, he tells this story. Mark tells this story. The disciples have left in verse 13. And then we get this story about John the Baptist. And Mark uses this as a way to foreshadow, right? Jesus' death himself, a violent end at the end of the power tip of the empire. That's what's going on here. It happens with John and it happens with Jesus. That it doesn't matter how well you try to protect yourself. It doesn't matter how well you try to prepare yourself. There are moments when your very ministry puts you at risk. When you march against gun violence, when you march with folks in a Black Lives Matter protest, or you hold a candlelight vigil for George Floyd or one of the countless others who have come before and since George Floyd. If you spend time talking about domestic violence and how we can support the shelters around us. And I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. There is someone who's going to be ticked off at you. And here's just my promise as a professor. Maybe they didn't teach you this in seminary. Maybe we need to teach that in that group. But here's the thing. There will never be a moment in your ministry, not one moment, when someone's not angry at you, upset at you, frustrated with you. And some of those you know about because they want to share them, right? And they want to come sit in the office and talk to you and tell you how much you messed up and how much you hurt their feelings. And some of them will send you the email and just leave this sort of curt comment. And sometimes you'll get an anonymous letter saying, I cannot believe on January 9th, you talked about the insurrection on January 6th. How dare you? You sounded angry. You sounded frustrated. And, you know, I got these 2 anonymous letters and I thought, yay, I ticked them off. That's great. Checked off that tab. I didn't intentionally go in to make anyone angry, but when we preach the gospel, when we talk about who we're called to be as beloved, as the beloved community of God, as we're trying to live into what God calls us to, this great kingdom, not kingdom, I use kingdom, because of the relationships that we have as kin together, as family together. If we talk about that, then injustice and belittling of others is not okay. If we want to proclaim and to bring about the kingdom of God, if we want to do that work, we're going to make somebody angry because some of our churches are just simply not doing the work, right? So John and Jesus are raising trouble. They're raising Cain. They're just not doing, the political leaders of that time period any good, because all that people see is they're proclaiming this injustice. They're proclaiming a different way to live together. They're advocating for the folks on the margins. And we have to do that kind of work as well. It takes us into the possibility every time a story, a piece leads us to the violent death of Jesus, we're talking about a significant cost, right? And many of us have felt that. Many of us understand that. And what I want you to understand is that you'll still do great ministry, even though someone's mad at you. And you may never know why they're mad at you. But you're still called to do the ministry. You're still called to challenge the status quo. You're still called to advocate for those folks who've been left out. You're still called to do real, concrete, hands dirty ministry, to be in the street with your people, to be, at the food bank with your people. And I know that's been very difficult the last 15 months. But one of the things that I take out of this pandemic is that our people are energized. They want to embrace something new. They want to figure out, how do we get better connected? We had to shut down our Tuesday night meals. And then it was like, okay, but how are we going to continue to feed people? What are the ways, if we're not doing that in our building, how do we advocate and show ways to do that elsewhere? So the foreshadowing of Jesus' death also is an invitation into living how he lived his life. And one of the things I wanted to lift up about this particular Sunday is there's a really interesting connective piece for preaching in the letter to Ephesus. It's about adoption and redemption, and those ties can be clearly linked together, and I think particularly helpful. Here's just a couple of pieces that I think are really important. John's ministry had been so well known that Herod had heard about it, right? If our ministry, people are not hearing about our ministry, if the community leaders and the powers that be have not heard about our ministry, if it doesn't reach the ears of others, I think that's a moment to gut check and figure out what it is you need to change about your church and how you interact with the world. He wanted change now. He wanted to make sure that there, whatever the catalyst was, himself or Jesus, that there was a clear call to change, to live into the gospel much better. And Herod offered the people one thing, but John and Jesus offered a totally different thing, a new world, a new compassion, a new collaboration, a new understanding of justice, a new invitation into the beloved community. And here's one of those moments when we can really share and deal with that. So the beheading itself, it really challenges us. It challenges us in ways that I think we're often uncomfortable. I remember, and some of you may as well, when the movie came out, The Last Temptation of Christ, right? And it showed a relationship, or the possibilities of a relationship of Jesus and Mary in an alternate ending that really ruffled a whole lot of feathers. But I also remember when a movie came out that Mel Gibson did, The Passion of the Christ. Do you remember that? Some of you seen that? So my wife and I went to see that movie, and I remember vividly the place was packed. I had never seen a religious movie in a movie theater that had that kind of attention. There had been some of those like Left Behind movies and things like that, that sort of more charismatic evangelical folks had supported. But this is people that many are Christian already, and they're excited about seeing Christ's story up on the screen, and there's this great opportunity for witness, and churches were taking busloads of people to all go watch it together, and we're sitting in that movie theater, and I heard sort of some yes and some wow, kind of moments. I heard some gasps when they weren't sure exactly what was going to happen next, even though they'd read the gospel account maybe, or maybe this is a whole new story for them. But I've never experienced anything in a theater as visceral as explicit showing of Christ's wounds and the crucifixion and the pain and the agony that was happening. And if you go back and study that movie, there were people who fainted, people who, literally went into cardiac arrest. It was one of those things that there was just this phenomenon of people experiencing that in a way that reading the story on the screen, in the Bible, it doesn't elicit all of those kind of same physiological reactions that did. But the other thing that happened is that it became more real, because even the 10 Commandments and other movies had not showed it that explicitly. And so when we're talking in the church and we're sharing sort of the explicit nature of, they cut his head off and put it in a platter, right? They nailed Jesus to a cross and sliced his side open. These are violent deaths. These are deaths that are excruciatingly painful. And when we sugarcoat that, when we don't want to go there, on Good Friday, I just think, I'm not going all Mel Gibson on them, but I certainly want them to understand what it meant, what the cost was. And the thing that echoed for me as I was preparing this over the last few weeks, I was thinking about empire, the powers that be, being willing to just flippantly give power over another human being to a jealous child, a jealous mother. What does it mean when empire, the powers that be, kill a person for who they are and how they teach and what they do and their baptisms and all of those kind of stuff? And if you have not yet or adequately addressed death at the hands of the empire, then this is that moment when you absolutely can and should. We are living in a time where there is so much hatred, there's so much polarization, there's so much refusal to listen and honor each other, that if we are not proclaiming a gospel that protects the marginalized folks, that challenges the death at the hands of the empire, then we have owned the challenge and the complicit nature that many of our nuns and duns have said. You're not relevant. You're not taking on what's going on in the world. And there are going to be some people that as you begin that, you say, all right, pull your feet back. If you've got on sandals, protect your toes. This is that moment, right? I talk to my students about, sometimes we have to preach with our bags packed, ready to be run out, because it's that important to deal with these particular issues. You can't do it every Sunday because they're going to be like, okay, you're packed already. Hasta la vista, we're done with you. But these times call for a transformational gospel. They call for a prophetic witness to what's happening in the world. And I know many of you are set in very different environments. You have different contexts. Some of you are more comfortable than others. But if we don't talk about the church's role in helping create that kingdom, helping bring about the kingdom that God calls us to, then what the heck are we standing up in the pulpit for? If we're just there to comfort folks, if we're just there to encourage folks, and there's no challenge, there's no forward witness, there's no bringing people into a new relationship with the world around us, and do that through our preaching. I struggle with it. And one of the things I find really interesting, and I think someone just said something about it in the post. In Methodism, which is what I grew up in, there is grace abounds for everybody, right? There's prevenient grace, there's justifying grace, there's sustaining grace. All of these things are a part of that. But grace is our story. I mean, it's about grace. It's about, we get God's grace. And as a result of that, we act in the world. It's a part of our sacred responsibility as Christians to act in the world. And so here's the deal. When I came to Lutheran, I remember some of those first classes, and I would talk about, man, this is a great moment to have a call to action. And this is one of those wonderful ways to sort of begin to help people see different alternatives of how we might live together. And I kept hearing sort of this muddled conversation about the fourth article, we're saved by grace alone without works. The fourth article is really important. And I thought, okay, I got to really read this. I came to a Lutheran institution as a Methodist. So I read it and I thought, I get it. I get that. That's sort of where we are too. But the fifth and sixth articles tell us that we're called to live out that faith. You don't ought or must or should, but you envision together, what might this look like? What might this look like if we were to preach a call for justice for the oppressive forces in the world to get their knee off the neck of the God's beloved people? Then, I think we're losing out in a moment when it's really imperative that we work together. Now, I want us to, we're going to take a break in just a second, and then we're going to come back. Or should we go to the break first or to the breakout session, Michael? Do you have a sense?
I think that perhaps if we do a breakout session, and then as part of that, if you all need to take a quick break, you can do that within that session.
Okay,
No,
that
we'll
sounds
just
good.
need a definite time to come back, whatever time you prefer.
Yeah,
Dr.
okay.
Wiseman.
So I want, what I'd like for you to do, it's sort of talking through these first two Sundays. I want you to talk about how you in your church prepare people to be sent into the world. And whether or not your ministry, your church, your congregation is known in your area. But also want you at, you can choose as a group which one of these that you want to respond to, and what risks are you taking in your ministry. These are some things that I want you to sort of share about. So we're going to give you about, what do we think? I think about 20 minutes. And part of that time, I'd love for y'all for about 10 minutes or so to be in conversation together, break on your own. But I would love for us to come back together at 20 till, all right, at 10:40. Got that? So Michael's going to split you up into groups. You'll be able to go into that and you guys decide, but spend a little bit of time talking together about your church, about preparation, and about risk taking, because I think that's the thing that's really imperative for us right now. And then be back in the main session at 20 till. All right. Have a great break.
Sounds
and
good.
a great conversation. I'll see you all in a little bit.
Y'all go ahead and if you want to take a snapshot real quick of the screen, just so you have captured that. I'll post them again while you're in groups, but it's not always easy to send a message to the breakout rooms. That doesn't come through very well. So
Yeah.
go ahead and take a picture of that real quick, and we'll break you out here in about 10 seconds.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
All right, welcome back. We get to this part of Mark's text, and we get my favorite advice from Jesus, where he basically says, take a nap. And I am one of those folks that sacredness is attached to the post-liturgical nap. Sundays, I usually barely get home and have a bite to eat before I crash and sleep for a couple hours. And I think part of it is physiological and psychological. And, part of that is just the exhaustion level that we often come to the preaching task. But also my dad always did it. And so I thought that's how you did it, right? You prepare, you preach, you sleep. And that was the thing that I learned growing up. So we're going to look at this next part of Mark, which is one of those stories that is a bracket. It is told in two parts. And so we see that in Luke as well. There's a couple of other places where we see this. But I want us to read this story together. I'm going to, again, invite someone to be our reader. And we will read the first section, and then we'll come back and do the second section. So is there someone who is willing to read Mark 6:30-34 for us?
I'll do it if you'd like, Dr. Wiseman.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As he went, should I read 34?
Yeah, through 34. Yeah.
Okay. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them things.
All right. So this is a continuation of the story earlier in chapter 6, right? Jesus sends his disciples out 2 by 2, and this is when they have returned. So how long were they gone? Where exactly did they go? Doesn't really matter to Mark in this moment, but he wants to continue that preparedness for the ministry that was going to be taking place, and literally says, hey, let's come and rest for a little while, right? Let's come and do this. There's an intentionality behind that, right? There's an intentionality of saying, I've experienced all this. You're going to experience part of it too. How can we make sure that we care for one another in the midst of this? He knew what he was sending them to do. He knew how difficult it was going to be. And this lesson is, hey, let's take care of ourselves. Take care of you. Take care of me. Let's come aside and rest for a little bit. Now, doesn't matter what he said was going to happen. That's not what happened. The people pursued him. The people showed up. They wanted to be there. They wanted to be with him. And, that there's nothing wrong with that. But let me tell you, the overwhelming nature of pastoral ministry is something that we cannot avoid conversations around. Even pre-pandemic, there were a lot of pastors that were really struggling with the weight of the church, with the fact that many of our church buildings are draining our income levels, with the fact that declining numbers and reducing number of worship services and reduced number of staff hours can just be overwhelming. And while we're sitting in this unique moment when the church can really begin to redefine itself, right? I don't know how many of you have read Phyllis Tickle, but in her book, I believe it's The Great Emergence, I'm trying to remember, she talks about that about every 500 years, we need to sort of clean out our closet, clean out our attic, clean out, get rid of some of the stuff that's not working and begin to reform and understand ourselves anew. And we're about at that 500 mark, a little past that from the Reformation. And is this a moment when we collectively, collaboratively, imaginatively, create a conversation about what the church can be? And I just think Michael and I were talking about this before people started coming back on, that we never can say that COVID is not the disaster that it is. Today, I read in the news just a little while ago that the U.S. hit the 600,000 mark of COVID deaths. But one of the things that COVID has taught us is to communicate differently, to figure out ways to be in community differently, to figure out how to reach out in different ways. And that is a significant gift, right? And in the midst of all that, it takes effort, it takes time. Your sign may need to be life requires Jesus and coffee and naps. I'm in control of the PowerPoint, so I put tea because that's what I drink. It's a vanilla rooibos South African tea. I just absolutely love it. But it doesn't have caffeine in it. So it kind of defeats the purpose at times for some people. But we got to have those moments when we're taking care of ourselves, right? And he wants his disciples to take care of themselves. So what I'd love for you to do just for a second is I want you to think over the span of my ministry, which may be, less than 5 years, it may be, 5 to 15 years, it may be 15 years or more, it may even be 30 years, on a scale of 1 to 10, and you can put your hands up if your camera's on. Where are you on the overwhelm level, right? If 1 is, it's pretty good and I'm handling everything great, to 10, I am totally overwhelmed and I have no idea what I'm doing anymore. And I'm completely feeling drained and at a loss. So I'm just wondering if you put your hands up real quick, tell me what level you're at, right? And I won't be able to see all of you since the screen is shared right now, but here's one of the things that I have discovered. Everyone I talk to is overwhelmed. It's not just pastors. It's families, it's parents trying to, teach their kids at home. It's hospital administrators and doctors, and it's stock boys and girls at the grocery store, and it's truck drivers that are trying to get, goods back and forth, and it's, workers in, pharmaceutical plants that are trying to get, shots and vaccines out, and everybody feels overwhelmed. But what's interesting is the job that we have, right? The job that we have, which is a vocation, it's a calling that took us to this. We know that it is hard. We know from seminary, I hope somebody told you it was going to be hard. I had a group of seniors one year were talking about all the extra time they were going to have once they graduated from seminary, because they didn't have to do, classes anymore, and they'd have to read at the same levels. And I just looked at them and started chuckling. I was like, man, you have no clue what is about to hit you. I mean, it's a tsunami of stuff that has to get done. And often you're the only one can do it. And, your time is the church's time. And you've got to be there all the time. You got to be out visiting, but we want you in your office. We want you to preach great sermons, but we also want you to, feed the poor and make sure that the pews are straight, and everything else that goes along with that. There's an overwhelming nature to it. And so let's talk about what some of the stressors are. People, that's a stressor. The greatest gift of the church is people. And the greatest deficit in the church, the greatest problem of the church is people. Because people are human, and sometimes we don't handle things well. We suck at relationships sometimes. Sometimes we're so drained, we don't even know what's going on in the lives of the people around us. It's a stressor, right? We have too many tasks, we have not enough rest, there's significant change, and there's opposition. I cannot even begin to count the number of friends, clergy friends on my Facebook feed and Twitter and Instagram and things like that, and just in collegial meetings. I just cannot even begin to count the number of people who have said, I can't make people happy. If we're closed, they're mad because we're not open. If we open with masks, they're mad because, they don't want to wear masks. If we're open and no masks, there are people who are like, how dare you have people in the church that don't have masks on? There is no way we're going to make people happy. And so typically when we get under these stressful situations, there's three things that we typically do. We fight, we flee or flight, or we freeze. And all three of those can be very detrimental to our ministry. We have to figure out ways to be in relationship and know that these are sort of the endorphins, all the things that comes into our body that goes back to, protecting our families from woolly mammoths. Is still part of our system. We're still like, oh, do I fight? Do I run away? Do I hide? Or does it just put me in a state that I'm frozen? I can't do anything. Ministry means exhaustion in so many levels, but Jesus is right. We cannot lead if we are not taking care of ourselves. And I'm going to be honest with you. There have been times in my ministry I've done better at that than others. During COVID, my church was really, really gracious. And they said, you can have one Sunday off a month. We can pre-tape, we can have a guest pastor, but we know how exhausting this is right now. And I also know that's privilege. I have a church who's got the resources to do that. And, we were doing live stream several years before COVID. So we had all the apparatus, all the cameras, all the, technical stuff that was in place. And so we would pre-record like on a Wednesday or Thursday night, and I'd have the weekend off. And we'd drive to the beach, or we'd drive to the Poconos on Saturday and sleep in on Sunday. And not very many people had that. But here's one of the things that bothers me. And that is that if our body and our mind and even our spirit is going to react in a particular way against whatever's attacking us, or we feel like is an attack to us, we have to sort of step back a little bit and figure out what we need to do next. And I think that's what Jesus was doing. He was saying, okay, you've been out there. You've been doing the ministry that I sent you to. Let's take a pause for a minute. Let's see where we are. Let's evaluate and then figure out what the next steps are. And what unfortunately happens, and it happens to a lot of us, nobody lets us rest. And there's still so many issues that we're trying to face. And there's no cookie cutter, one size fits all sort of reality. Some people are looking at what the church is going to do next. Maybe it's new church. Maybe it's polymodal, which a colleague of mine at ULS coined. I don't know. He may have gotten it from somewhere, but he's taking credit for it at this point. But polymodal is that, how do we use different formats to try to get across? So we use live stream on Sunday mornings. We use Zoom for meetings, for Bible study, for a number of other things. And right now, we're sort of being polymodal. We have people in the building, and we also have our live stream going out. When we have staff meetings or we have finance meetings, we've begun to come back together in person, but not everyone feels comfortable with that yet. So we have our screen where we have some of the folks on Zoom and some people in the room. When I was preaching early on in the pandemic, I hated preaching on live stream because there were two people, it felt like a football field away, running the tech booth, and no one else in the building except myself and our music leader. And we were always at least 10 feet apart from each other. And it felt very lonely. A few times I was invited either at chapel for our seminary or other seminaries or other churches to preach on Zoom. And I could see the reactions of people. And it was so nice to go, oh, that's a face. Look at that. It's a face listening while I do this. And so, church is beginning to change. Some are going right back to where they were. And every study I've seen right now says we cannot go back to where we were. We have to figure out new ways to be the church, new ways to be in relationship. But that's gonna cause some rejection, as we had in the last text. That's going to cause some need for respite, for care. And one of the most significant studies that I have read in a long time is a recent Barna study. They're trying to do some longitudinal studies of the impact of the COVID virus on pastoral ministry, right, across the board. So early on, it was, how are you doing? How long do you think you'll be able to do this? How long, what kind of changes are you making? And as of April, it's not been updated since then, but as of April, their data shows that 29% of clergy have come out of the pandemic seriously consider leaving the ministry, that it has just been too much. It's been too much weight. It's been too much time. It's been too many tasks. It's been too many oppositional time periods. It's been too isolating. I mean, it's just too much. Now, the next steps will be how many folks actually leave the ministry, because if there's 29% that have seriously considered it, the next data down is have somewhat considered it, and that's 23%. And so we're over 50% of clergy have thought at one point, man, maybe I don't know that I can do this long term. And I love preaching. I love being a pastor. All these things, make me quite happy. But there were times during this pandemic, I just said, I don't know that I want to be in pastoral ministry after this is over. This is just too exhausting. It's too difficult. And I was getting some breaks here and there. So I want you to be attentive to the fact that even in the gospel story, Jesus says to his disciples, you got to take care of yourself, right? So part one, which we read just a few minutes ago, I think that, a lot of folks, psychology folks, counseling folks, therapeutic individuals would sort of say he might be sort of helping them to avoid compassion fatigue, which I think we also suffer from. We have to give so much of ourselves, and our doctors and nurses and folks who are, changing the sheets and cleaning the floors, and people who are making meals in hospitals and long-term care facilities, they're getting it too. In many nurses and doctors are considering different things to do, different vocations to move into, because they're just exhausted. They're just exhausted. And the interesting thing is, we talked earlier on about Mark talking about the immediacy, right? The urgency of Jesus' mission, the urgency of sharing the parables and sharing the stories and teaching what is going on in the world and what the beloved community might look like. And here we get this intentional break where Mark's like, yeah, let's rest for a little bit. But the key here is they don't get it. They don't get the rest. The people show up anyway, which leads us to one of the most important, one of the most well-known parts of the gospel. And it comes in that second part. Excuse me, I'm going to back up just a second. It comes in that second part of the gospel story, and that's Mark 6:53 to 56. Whoever was reading a minute ago, do you want to do that section as well?
Yes.
Okay.
When they crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that he might touch even the fringe of his cloak, that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
Yeah, and you get to this moment, and this is the breakdown of that break time. And I love the part that this is so focused on the healing ministry of Jesus. And I'm gonna be honest with you, one of the things I struggle with is preaching about healing. Because there are lots of folks out there who are like, I don't believe in healing anymore. I've asked, multitude of times for folks to be healed and they weren't healed. I need healing and God didn't show up. And we have some of our sibling denominations in the Protestant strain of faith that really they preach a prosperity gospel, a gospel that says if you're faithful enough, if you give enough, if you're if you're a good enough follower, then healing will come to you, wealth will come to you. And those kind of theologies are just so contrary to my own understandings of the gospel and faith. But there's expectations, right? We've all sat at the bedside of someone who was in hospice or someone near death, and their family has prayed for healing. Their family has prayed for something to happen that will rescue them or their loved ones from this illness. And you think about during COVID, the literally hundreds of thousands of folks who died alone, who died with no family being able to come close to them. And when we talk about healing stories, we're talking about the possibility that God's activity in the world continues, that miracles still happen. And I believe they do, absolutely. But when we put those kind of expectations on God, that, my partner's sick and I want them to no longer have cancer, or my dad has got Alzheimer's and I want him to get his full faculties back, or whatever, it gets hard. And to be able to justify, to be able to have a conversation about healing can sometimes be quite difficult. So part of it is, how do we deal with the realities of sickness and death and all of those kind of things? But what Jesus wants to do is he gets out of the boat, they recognize him, and they rushed from all of the region to bring sick folks to them. And their faith was strong enough that they could simply touch the hem of his garment, which echoes to another parable told in another gospel, to touch his cloak and to be healed. But I got to tell you, how they recognize him. I mean, really, there's no description of what Jesus looks like anywhere in Mark or any of the other gospels. There's no if Matt Damon was walking across the windows outside my church office, I'd go, oh, cool, that's Matt Damon, because I've seen him in the movies, right? But if someone else walked by and I didn't know what they looked like, I mean, it could be Tom Selleck, and I've never seen Tom Selleck, but there he is. And I wouldn't know exactly who he was. How did they recognize him? It may be kind of a funny sort of question, but it always strikes me. How'd they know? Did people say, hey, there's this guy, he looks like this, he dresses like this, he's with 12 other guys, there's some other people who are along for the journey, there's some women, but this guy, he's got like long hair and a beard, or he's got short hair and a beard. But definitely the image that we portray of who Jesus is so far removed from the biblical possibilities of what he looked like from that time period. And this is one of those computer generated drawings that made waves a couple of years ago. It was done by a group of scientists who were thinking through looking at what that ethnicity, race, what persons of that region, what all of the ways that they might look. And they came up with this image. And as soon as I saw it, I showed it to my son, and this was a number of years ago. He was like a cranky teenager. And he said, oh, they made Jesus look like, a terrorist. And I was like, no, you can't say that. I've taught you better than that. And he said, no, it looks like the mugshots that you see when you go into the FBI offices, and they've got them in these TV shows. And I'm like, okay, listen, one, we've got to understand that whatever preconceptions that we have about Jesus, they're likely not exactly who Jesus is. And my son and I had several long talks after that. I've got him back on the straight and narrow. And it was just a flippant kind of conversation, but this is probably much more likely what Jesus looked like. He was a Jew from that region. And the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus that we see in a lot of our church buildings, and the imagery that's out there about this white Jesus, is just crap. I mean, it's just crap. That's not what he looks like. But I'm telling you, I see that Salmon painting in almost every church that I go to, the light-haired Jesus. And part of my task is to put up additional images alongside that, so they can see some other images. I tried to take it out completely, but someone's grandfather made the frame, and they used wood that they brought back from a farm somewhere, and it had all this emotional attachment to it. And I thought, okay, I can't take it out of the frame. I can't put something else in a frame there, but I can do different images. So I got some images and took them to, I think it was a Walgreens, and they do like an hour or less. They do it on a print. They do it on canvas, all kinds of stuff. And so we created a better set of images for folks to see a variety of images of Jesus. But it always just cracks me up when it says they recognized him. I'm like, wow, that's really intriguing. I'm not sure how that happened, but it's kind of interesting. Now, what's interesting, we just talked about this piece for just a minute, and one of the reasons for this being right here, we just missed the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on the water in Mark, and all of a sudden we jump to John. And so that's what we're going to do for this final week of the month. And so I'd like for you to turn to John 6. And, John is one of those gospels, is the gospel that is the least like the synoptic gospels. And there's a reason for that. It was written with a different audience. It was written with a different understanding of the context, where Luke, I think, is prophetic and transformational and very inclusive, and Mark a little bit, really focused on action and what folks are called to do. And John, wow, it's poetic. It's beautiful imagery. It's an opportunity for us to use language that has just fed the hearts of people. I mean, think about John 3:16. I mean, it is an epic thing today. I remember growing up and seeing John 3:16 in the stands of sports games. You still see them at times, but we move over so that we can see John's version of these ideas. And it's really, I think, interesting to move into. It's a great way to look. So it's, again, sort of a two-part pericope. There's two ways two places where we get this story. And the feeding of the 5,000 is one of those things that I immediately have to challenge, right? So when people were counted during that time period, I'm preaching to the choir, you guys know this. When they counted folks during that time period, they counted men. They would not have counted the women and the children. What's interesting for me is how often women are not at the center of stories, and are not even, at the periphery of stories. They didn't say 5,000 men and their families. It's just they fed 5,000. And a lot of scholars have ventured to guess that it could be as many as 15,000 or more that were actually there. And it's the only miracle story that is told in all four Gospels, which is significant. It's that important. When you think about the feeding of the 5,000, we're talking about an example of what Eucharist looks like. We're talking about what the community could look like. I mean, this is the realm of God. This is the vision of God. And as we use sort of I'm really fixated on this language from Frank Thomas right now. He talks about the moral imagination of preaching. The moral imagination of preaching is to center ourselves on the morality, the justice in our world, and imagine what it might look like if it came to fruition, right? If it became real, if it became a part of who we are. And I think the feeding that Jesus does, not only in this gospel and all four gospels here, but other stories about meals, it's just exactly what I think the kingdom of God looks like. It is a huge banquet. It is an enormous place that's got, everybody invited. And some of you have seen the memes. Christian faith means to build longer tables, not bigger walls. And I think that's part of what we're called to, is to stretch the tables as wide as we possibly can to continue to increase those. That's one of the things that's great. It's a well-known story. Sometimes that makes it harder to preach, and sometimes that makes it easier to preach. And that's just a really important piece. I grew up in a tradition where we didn't have communion every Sunday. Many Lutherans do. And it's a part of our heritage, both for myself as a Wesleyan, as a Methodist, and also as Lutherans. John Wesley taught that whenever people were gathered, that they should have communion. That every public event, every gathering that we had, we ought to break out and have communion together. And my church that I serve right now, Gloria Day in Huntingdon Valley, which is a suburb of Philadelphia, we do the first Sunday of the month. We have communion. We used to have an additional service that had communion every week, but right now that service is not meeting. So we're only doing communion once a month. But deep connections, deep opportunities, and opportunities for us to relate to that. So, for the first thing I want us to do is then to invite someone to read, particularly the first part of this text, John 6, 1 through 15. Let's do that first. And if someone will unmute and agree to read, I'd appreciate that.
Dr. Wiseman, I have the inclusive language if you want me to start
fine.
off with that.
Yeah, that's great.
So from the inclusive translation. Sometime later, Jesus crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, that is Lake Tiberias, and a huge crowd followed him, impressed by the signs he gave by healing sick people. Jesus climbed the hillside and sat down there with the disciples. It was shortly before the Jewish feast of Passover. Looking up, Jesus saw the crowd approaching and said to Philip, "Where can we buy some bread for these people to eat?" Jesus knew very well what he was going to do, but asked this to test Philip's response. Philip answered, "Not even with 200 days' wages could we buy loaves enough to give each of them a mouthful." One of the disciples, Simon Peter's brother Andrew, said, "There's a small boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. But what good is that for so many people?" Jesus said to them, "Make the people sit down." There was plenty of grass there, and as many as 5,000 families sat down.
Okay.
Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and gave them out to all who were still sitting there. He did the same with the fish, giving out as much as they could eat. When the people had eaten their fill, Jesus said to the disciples, "Gather up the leftover pieces so that nothing gets wasted." So they picked them up and filled 12 baskets with the scraps left over from the 5 barley loaves. The people, seeing the sign that Jesus had performed, said, "Surely this is the prophet who was to come into the world." Seeing that they were about to come and carry him off to crown him as ruler, Jesus escaped into the hills alone.
Oh, I love that. Jesus escaped into the hills alone. The NRSV says he withdrew again to the mountains by himself. And man, this text has so many rich dimensions to it. There are so many different layers to move into. And each and every one of you are going to have to figure out in your particular context what's going to be best. But I love the connection between this text and the Exodus and Passover, those connections together that he just completely understands that folks have to be fed. It's not a question of can we, it's we are doing that, not can we. It's clear that it's going to be a difficult thing, but you get grumbling people, right? Always get grumbling people. The disciples are like, I don't think we should feed all these people. Manna to feed the people, not wasting any of it. There's these real, very, very significant ties between the Jewish experience in the Exodus and in this particular moment. And, you know, people in town for the Passover, that's a huge part of the Passover experience for Jews anyway, is the breaking of bread, of being together and sharing a meal together. And, you know, it brings one of those things. I remember, gosh, it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I was preaching at a church that I was invited to come be the guest pastor at. And they were doing a series on feeding ministries, or the feeding text in Jesus. And I don't think this was the text, it was a different one. But I finished preaching and someone came up and said something like this. They said, you know, you said that we ought to be feeding people. And you know what? I think there are some people who deserve it and some people who don't. And after I pulled my, you know, jaw off of the ground, it reminded me, and we've all seen this before, there are these literal conversations that are happening about the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, the folks who deserve to be taken care of and those who do not. And that is just such anathema to who we are as a Christian community. And, you know, what Jesus was doing in this moment was he was not designating that some people deserve to be fed and some people don't. The miracle of this story has been hotly debated, and there have been some really interesting twists. Some folks, you know, they want to diminish sort of Jesus' miraculous effort and say that what happened was this collaborative sharing in that moment, that when the little boy gave his, everyone else who had, you know, a little tucked in here, a few, you know, I've got some bread too, that people began to share. And, you know, I fell into that trap early on in my ministry. I thought, wouldn't it be really cool that the example of this text is that one begins to share and all others follow behind that. But when we preach it that way, when we set up that that's going to be how we understand this text, what happens then is that we take the miraculous, you know, the exponential increase in what was available from Jesus, from his divine activity. So, you know, there are a number, as I said, a number of different ways, some controversial ways that some people sort of look at these texts, particularly this one that is found in all 4 Gospels. And, you know, what do we do with that miracle? Miracles are sometimes hard for us to imagine. I mean, in today's, you know, society, evidence and facts sometimes have no sway over the people. It doesn't matter what evidence is or what facts are. I'm going to believe in what Stephen Colbert calls truthiness. I don't know if some of you watch Stephen Colbert. He's on a mainstream talk format in the evening now, but he had a wonderful show called the Colbert Report. And in it, he often talked about this sort of deification of facts that are mine, not necessarily backed up with any kind of evidence to the contrary. And he does a series, and if you want to Google it, just Google Stephen Colbert and truthiness. And he legit takes on the sort of alternative facts that people do. And it's from a number of years ago. It's not even from the last 4 years. But when we talk about what does it mean to feed people, to literally feed people, that has been greatly impacted through COVID. My mission team right now is trying to figure out how do we continue to feed people. And during that time period, one of the things that we did is we helped steer some of our folks who came to some agencies that were going to continue to work and feed during the pandemic. And we donated all the funds and more of what we typically spend on that feeding ministry elsewhere, because there was a lot of caution in our congregation about not really being willing to jump in and continue to feed people in person. And every church makes those decisions, but he doesn't ask. He just says, sit down, you're here, sit down, let's eat. And I think that one of the things that we talked about earlier was rest and rejuvenation from that text. But here Jesus is saying something else. He's saying you have to feed your faith. You have to continue to nurture your faith and nurture the faith of others. And that's one of those things that we can't skimp on. We have to continue to work through those things. And I think it's really important. One of the tricky things that comes up also as a part of this text is they wanted to make him a king, and he withdraws, he flees, he runs away from this moment. And it goes back to the prophetic images of the Messiah and who would come to save the Jewish people, to rescue them from their oppressors, to be a militaristic or a political figure that would change society altogether. And what's happening in front of them with Jesus feeding them is this is God's love and compassion for the world being exhibited in a physical moment. They're being fed literally and figuratively. And instead of seeing Jesus as the living embodiment of a compassionate and loving God, they see the potential of what he might be if he becomes the Messiah that they want, the Messiah that they expected, the Messiah that is to be their king. And I think that's one of those moments where, you know, they misread the room, right? They misread what Jesus is about in that particular moment. And they see what he could be, this political and military rival that comes to take on the oppressive rule. And, you know, I'm reminded every single time on Palm Sunday when we hear and read the story about Jesus sending his disciples to get the unridden colt for him to get on the back of to come into the city. And, you know, you guys know as well as I do probably that the only person who got to do that was a king. And to do that was a slap in the face of the empire. And, you know, you think Jesus knows that his life is in danger. Jesus knows what's going to happen. And Jesus knows what's about to take place. He doesn't slink in out of one of the outer gates. He doesn't come, you know, with a very small entourage to slip into town. He comes literally in a symbolic gesture that I'm a king, not the kind of king you might expect, but I am a king. And one of the things he does, and you know, he gets on that horse and begins the unridden colt, and he begins to walk into town, and he's literally saying, here I am, come get me. I'm not hiding from you. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm gonna continue to do all that I need to do. But he was not the military and political rival to the oppressive rule that people thought he might be. There are glimpses of it. There are moments when he goes against the empire. He tells the folks who are in power that they're not living up to who God calls them to be. And in many ways, their desire has nothing to do with who he actually is and who he was called to do. And I think one of the things that we have to talk about is, what are our expectations? What are our expectations for our political leaders, for our religious leaders? 25 years ago, clergy were listed in the top 5 most trusted professions in America. Top 5. And over the years of sexual scandals, of priest abuse, sexual abuse of minors, financial malfeasance, of affairs, and all the other stories that we hear from both the TV church, but also the institutional church, and the cover-up that happens around that. Clergy are barely in the top 50 in a lot of studies today. We have fallen significantly. And part of that is there's an expectation of how we're supposed to live, of how we're supposed to walk in the world. And one of the things that I believe wholeheartedly is that we have to be authentically ourselves, right? I am who I am. The Popeye. I am who I am, and Jesus saying often, "It is I. I am the one." And God's revelation to Moses that I am the I am. This is who I am. I am my person. I am who I am, and for Jesus to continue to be himself. To get a little angry at times, to push back at the religious and the political leaders, didn't mean he was going to ride in on a white horse with a sword and with an army behind him and, slay the oppressive empire. He came in a different way, meek and mild, but also a rabble rouser and troublemaker in the best senses of the word. And so you got this moment when they fed the people. In that story in and of itself, the connections to the Eucharist, the opportunity to talk about our own spiritual feeding is very powerful. But then they got to get out of there. They got to leave. They've got to get away from that. And here's that moment where the second part of the story comes in. Let's see, have I got someone who'll read this last part, 16 through 21?
I can read that.
Okay, thank you.
16 through 21.
Yeah, 16 through 21.
When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got in a boat, and started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going.
All right. It's intriguing the number of times that Jesus has either been around the water or going across the water in these last couple of verses. We have the mountaintops and we have the water. And to ground our faith in the elements, I think is a really profound thing. And we have this moment when the disciples are moving away. They're trying to get outside of the response of the crowd. I have been, I've been to a dozen or more political marches, including the big climate change march in New York City, the Women's March in DC before the inauguration of 45, and a number of others. We marched in a vigil after Matthew Shepard died. It's a whole number of things. And crowd dynamics are interesting. One of the things that we've seen is that crowds behave often in how the worst of that group wants to interact with the world. Crowds and protests often are infringed upon by marginalized groups or groups that are antithetical to the reason that the folks are marching, and they often do some stuff that diminishes from the protest, that diminishes from what they're trying to say. And I have been a part of crowds that began to get out of hand, and you didn't know what the heck to do. We had not been in Philadelphia very long, and we went down to the Wawa Celebrates America in downtown Philadelphia. It is a music festival. There is food vendors. There's all kinds of amazing stuff, culminating in an enormous fireworks on July 4th. We have not been down there in a number of years because of what happened to us the last time we did. We were in the midst of it. My nieces were here. John Mayer was the headliner. They were down, near the stage, and my sister and my parents, I guess it was, my sister and my parents and our son were sitting there, and we were listening to the music, and we were enjoying everything that was going on around us. It began to get a little bit darker, and the fireworks had just gone off. They had finished. And people were beginning to pack up and figure out, how to get out of there. It was going to be a huge, huge traffic tangle to get away. And all of a sudden, what we heard as shots coming out of a gun went off. And in that split second, you're like, okay, I got to grab my people. I've got to protect my people. Where's it coming from? What's going on? And there was a kind of very quick number of shots that we heard. And there was just chaos. I mean, there was mass chaos that happened, and everyone started running. I'm trying to keep hold of my family. My son gets a little taken away by part of the crowd. My wife begins to stumble, and I grab her to try to right her. And, they were knocking down barriers. We were getting shoved. And it was a terrifying moment. It was a moment that I remember so vividly. And then I remember someone coming over the loud system and saying, it was a car that backfired. There have not been any shots. Please calm down. Everything is okay. And in my head, I'm going, BS, that did not sound like a car backfiring. But the crowd that had panicked now all of a sudden begins to settle. And I heard whispers and then voices all around going, do you have everybody that's part of your group? Hey, does anyone need help looking for somebody? Hey, did anyone fall down? Does anyone need medical help? And it was this thing that happened on a dime. I mean, it flipped so quickly from this joyous 4th of July celebration with fireworks everywhere to this intensely panic-filled moment when I literally am not sure where shots might be coming from, whether or not we're safe, whether or not, my nieces who had gone up to the front of the stage, we had no idea where they were. My son got swept away, and I was terrified in a way that I had never been terrified in my life. My heart stopped, it felt. I had this lump in my gut that was just, oh my God, is he okay? Are my nieces okay? What in the heck are we going to do? And then there was the second flip when the crowd started helping each other. And they were picking up things that got knocked down, and they were helping people who had fallen in the midst of the chaos to get up, and they were assessing injuries, and nobody got hurt significantly. No shots were fired. But in those moments, I felt more terrified than I had ever in my life. And one of the things that that was so profoundly important for me is that this group of anonymous strangers became a community lifting up each other. And when we see these crowds that gather around Jesus, these are crowds of people who have heard stories about him. They've heard stories. Oh man, if you hear where Jesus is, you've got to go. He's healing people. He has something to teach that none of us have ever heard before. These moments where you think, wow, these crowds come together. And in this moment, this crowd is saying, we want you to become something different for us. And there's this fear factor that comes in. And then you get to this moment where I'm sure the disciples were nervous about what had happened. They were nervous, they were uncertain. They felt like, there was a miracle again, and we don't understand all of it. And because of the response of the crowd, they escape across the sea. That is the escape into the waters, the safe place, the safe harbor of a boat. And it ain't safe anymore, right? That they start to cross, there's a strong wind, and they begin to row as much as they could, and they're fighting the wind, they're fighting the waves, which echoes to other stories of Jesus and the water. And in this scene, there's also echoes of the Exodus. You have this crossing the water to safety. You have this crossing the water to become who we're called to be. And all of this becomes really profoundly powerful in the story of Jesus. And then the disciples see him. And in a number of ways, this is just the disciples once again, not even recognizing who Jesus is. This is in John, but here's this moment once again in this gospel where they're terrified. They think he's a ghost. In Jesus' calming word, Jesus' moment of acknowledgement of where they were is, it is I'm the one that you follow. I'm the one that you come for. I'm the one that has sent you and brought you back. I'm the one that has fed you and others, and I'm the one who will continue to feed you. I'm the one that will protect you when you're in danger. I'm the one who will make sure that we get through this together. And it's that calming voice, I think. I hear Jesus in this way when he vocalizes this, that it's authoritative, it's very clear, but it's also pastoral enough that they hear his compassion, they hear his care for them, and they take him into the boat. And immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. So there's this moment when they're out in the middle, and all of a sudden Jesus gets in, and they're on the other side. He has protected them. He has launched them. He has propelled them into safety. And that's one of those things a lot of our members are looking for. They're looking for, where's that safe place? I'm in the midst of a blowing storm. How does God show up for me? And will I recognize Jesus as he comes to me? Will I realize the power of the Holy Spirit? Will I sense its presence? What are those moments? And this is one of those profound moments when we can say to our people, there's Jesus right there. He's coming for you. You may not recognize who he is or who he's sent or what is happening in this moment, but it is Jesus. It is him coming toward us to rescue us and to bring us into right relationship and others. I want to share a few closing thoughts, and then I want to share a little bit of conversation as we move forward. There's no way in 2.5 or 3 hours that you can get all of the different layers and the nuance of gospel text. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to be contextually appropriate. You have to preach to the people that are there, right? And one of the ways we do that comes to me from Dr. Timothy Wingert. Some of you may know his writings. He's an amazing Luther scholar. He was a longtime professor at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia, left before we came into ULS, continues to teach in a number of different places at Princeton and Harvard, I know. And one of the things that he is well known for is this phrase, preach the damn gospel. If you're in the midst of difficult times, preach the damn gospel. If you're in the midst of challenging times, preach the damn gospel. The gospel is a gospel of redemption. It's a story of salvation. It's a story of revelation and incarnational being. It's a moment that we are challenged to what the world might look like, what our moral imagination might lead our congregations to see. And one of the things that I've heard more in the last 4.5 years from pastors, more than any other thing, is that their people don't want them to be political. The texts that are through the month of July, there are so many opportunities for us to envision that beloved community. There are so many opportunities for us to show what that might look like, feeding each other, resting together, being willing to challenge the empire that has destroyed and killed some of our siblings of faith, siblings of color. There's no way to preach the gospel without being political. Jesus took a stand against society and with society on many different moments. He took a stand against empire. He took a stand against, oppression and marginalization and humiliating moments that folks gave to the people who they othered. I think Jesus is pretty clear about that, that we are called to confront and to deal with the problems of our time. I want you to look at these texts and the opportunities that are in them and to be creative, to talk with your people, talk with your pericope groups, talk with a preaching friend about, new ways that you might see these texts. One of the scholars that I like to read, and I'm blanking on his name right now, I'll send it to Matthew so he can send it out. He talks about the fact that one of the things that our folks are looking for is a sermon that's a new hearing of the gospel, that looks at the gospel and says, here's a new way that we can interpret that. Here's a new way that we can move into what the world might look like in beloved community. And be yourself. A lot of times new pastors or pastors in new calls or pastors that are a little more reticent to share themselves. They want to see you for who you are, that what you say on Sunday, you act out on Tuesday morning at the store, and Thursday night at the prayer vigil, and Saturday at the protest march. One of the things that I say in every presentation is preach one sermon at a time. There may be a lot of meat in there. There may be a lot of peels of that onion, but figure out what that one thing is and always make the main thing the main thing. And that's where we go. Also, we're never alone when we go into the pulpit. Gene Lowry, great preaching scholar who wrote the homiletical plot and 20 other books about preaching. He was my preaching professor in seminary. And one of the things that he said on a regular basis is, you may not know it, but every time you step into the pulpit, the world is at stake. Now, it might not be the global world. It might be a 14-year-old who is about to come out to their parents. It might be a 30-year-old who has been struggling with infertility for years, and they and their spouse have just decided that adoption is the way to go. And they're sort of struggling with the grief that comes from that decision and the excitement that comes from that decision. The world might be at stake for an 83-year-old person who's trying to decide whether or not they pay their prescriptions or buy more food. There is always someone's life that is at stake when we're in the pulpit, and that adds weight to what we do. That adds possibilities to how we preach. And I just want you to remember, absolutely, you're not alone in all of this. And you're not alone in the ways that we work together and that we interpret together. There's this whole collection of commentaries that are out there, and some of them are really helpful, some of them not as much. I have enjoyed the writing that I've done for preaching, for feasting on the Gospels and feasting on the Word. There are a number of resources out there like Working Preacher. There are some aggregating sites like Text Week, which sometimes has some theology that's not quite Lutheran in the way that it works. But there are lots of resources out there. And one of the things that I want preachers to do, particularly during this time when we're trying to figure out what the church looks like next, is to cast that moral vision, cast that moral imagination, begin to think about what is our church doing now that is focused on creating that imaginative and moral future. What are we not doing? How are we preparing, like you did in that first earlier conversation? But what are the ways that we can work through these texts together and really honor where they're leading us? We've got a little bit of time left, and I thought since we had some folks still on, we want to honor that we've got about 15 minutes left. But do you have questions or do you have comments about where you see some of these texts? And something about what I said today, or some other comment. Is there anyone who wants to share sort of where they are coming out of this time together, something that they learned or something that you want us to know that might aid in our own learning through these texts? Anybody?
I'd love to just share.
Sure.
My name is Pastor Elise Anderson, and I'm at Trinity Lutheran in Hickson, Tennessee. I've got a little 1 pound foster kitten on my shoulder.
I know, I saw that. I saw that. It was so sweet.
I do some homeless outreach work, and so we're fostering this little one back to life for one of our clients. But I first of all just want to say thank you so much from the presentation and the small group conversations. Just really hit on a lot of things I've been struggling with is a harsh way to say it, but kind of grappling with in terms of, dealing with this two-headed monster of the church's reputation. You've got that really intense evangelical, pushing salvation down people's throats monster. And then you've got the folks who mean well, but aren't quite getting out into the community enough.
Yeah.
And working in kind of the faith world and secular world, but all having kind of the same goal of, helping the needy and helping folks who are in a bad spot. It's been a very weird experience kind of coming from both sides.
Yeah.
And I guess the question I have, and something I'm on a staff, I'm one of 2 pastors. And I typically preach with a little more of a call to action,
Mhm.
or here are the flaws in the system. How can we fix the flawed system we're in? How can we contribute to community systems? And there are times when I feel like, do I need to back off those calls to action? Are they really just kind of needing to hear more gospel than law this week? But then every time I sit down to write, I feel called to push and to kind of, get us going, kind of out that servant entrance. Right. And so I just didn't know if like anyone or if you had any kind of guidance. Let's see, the pandemic has been 15 months. So I'm 18 months into my first call.
Wow. Wow.
So I'm pretty fresh. But yeah, so just kind of finding that balance between, the inspiration to go walk humbly and fight for justice, and spread God's love, but also not always being like we're not doing it right, kind of preacher.
Yeah, I taught a class last week, an intensive class called Preaching for Social Transformation. It's one of the pieces that I'm sort of working on in my own scholarship is how we do this, and it is very contextual. Okay, so if I'm in an environment where that is not a part of our DNA, right? We're doing justice work. We do some of the compassionate things that churches want to do, but we write checks for a lot of it, right? And we send money someplace, or we collect food and then somebody takes it. We don't get our hands dirty, which you're talking about a ministry where you're dealing with folks who are experiencing homelessness, and a lot of folks who are experiencing homelessness, they're food insecure. Some of them have undiagnosed or unmedicated medical situations, either mental or emotional or physiological. And so you're in an environment where they know that ministry is a part of who they are. So maybe you can push a little bit differently. Last week, one of my students said, so how do we know how far to push? And I said, if there was an algorithm that I could create, that would say, okay, if you haven't pushed in these 3 weeks, on week 4, you can do this and you can go 3 yards further than you went last time. There's just not that. I think the text tells us often what we're called to do, right? So if it is a text that is pushing the kingdom of God, that is creating an opportunity for us to push back against some of the social structures that are not living up to the people in need, the ways that people are getting left behind, then I'm going to preach that. But I can't get so strident or so committed to that I never give them an encouraging word. That I have to balance those things, and every context is different, right? So part of it is be in dialogue with your the other pastor that's there, the pastor that, how do you feel it's being taken? How often do you feel called to do these things? Be in dialogue with some of the leadership of your church. I have never been a called pastor in the Lutheran denomination until now. And one of the things they set up was a mutual ministry committee. I'd never even heard of a mutual ministry committee. And it's like the coolest thing. I get to talk through things with them. I get to sort of gauge the temperature of the congregation and the tolerance level of some of these things. And then you've got those moments where if you don't say something, your silence says 1,000 times louder what your words would have done. I have a number of friends in the queer community. I'm a part of the queer community. I'm married to my wife. We've been together for 22 years, and we will celebrate our 6th anniversary of being legally married. And we have a wide range of friends, some who are queer and participate in the life of the church. Some people are queer and can't have anything to do with the church because of the damage that they've done. What I continue to hear is when they're not named, right? When their stories are not shared, that it says more to them than anything else. So there are preachers who preached about Parkland, and they preached about Sandy Hook, and they preached about, all these other moments, but they didn't say a word after the Pulse nightclub shooting. And that said volumes, right? So part of it is it's this investigation of your own sort of self, right? I authentically, as a preacher of the gospel, feel compelled to proclaim a gospel of liberation and freedom. And so that means that I push some of those parameters. But there's some Sunday, we just need to bask in God's grace and glory. And so there's some weeks law's a little heavier, there's some weeks gospel's a little bit heavier, but it's being who you are authentically and listening to your listeners and figuring out ways that they feel stretched. And every once in a while, it's taking the temperature of the room with some trusted folks who are a part of the congregation. You can't press them every single week to go do something because they're exhausted already. They're just as tired as you are. So one of my students asked me, this is a couple of years ago, what do you do when people fall asleep when you preach? And I was like, well, one, no one falls asleep when I preach. But two, there are a number of reasons why people fall asleep. Maybe their baby was up all night with a colleague. Maybe they just moved to night shifts and their spouse said, you got to come on Sunday because I really need you to be there. And they're exhausted. Maybe they took cold medicine and the cold medicine is making them drowsy. Or maybe it's too warm in the room. Or maybe they're just not clicking with what you're saying today. And that's not the end of the world. So I guess my best advice is to just be authentically yourself, to proclaim the gospel in the ways that you believe you're being called to, because, you weren't called to be something else. You were called to be you. You were called not with this, the bishop doesn't lay hands and say, I know you were called and we're ordaining you, but we're ordaining you for who you might be, for who you could be, who you should be. We're ordaining you for who you are. And that means that sometimes we take some risks. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but a very valid one. How do we balance that? How do we figure out that? And I think it's being in dialogue with some preaching partners. I think that's being in dialogue with some of your members. And it's looking at the arc of the next couple of weeks and where you think you can push and where you think you might need to back off a little bit. But Mike Brown lay on the ground I'm blanking, I apologize. He laid on the ground on a Saturday night. And a lot of churches didn't even know on Sunday morning. But that next Sunday they did. And there were a lot of churches who didn't talk about it. And so I think it's figuring out what's happening. The scariest 2 sermons of my life that I was the most terrified was the Sunday after Donald Trump got elected, because I had Republicans in my midst and I had immigrant families and I had queer folks, and they were terrified. And to try to walk that line was very difficult. And the second time was January 9th. after the January 6th insurrection. It was hard, but I had to do it. I had to go there. And that's when I got the anonymous letters that said, you're angry and strident and you don't like us, you know, who are Republicans. And I just continue to try to care for the people and to speak what's on my heart. I don't know.
Yeah. That was awesome. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Dr. Wiseman, thanks so much
Yep.
for that. Really appreciate that. I wish we were in a room together because we could all clap. So we could do Zoom clap and do that. But I don't think I've ever thought about the disciples like that before. But now I have a new appreciation for those disciples. But as you can see, friends, Karyn Wiseman is someone who is passionate about God's word, and even more passionate about that. You just preach the damn gospel.
Yep.
You don't have to make stuff up. It's already right there. And the context of the world gives us enough to parlay that with what God's word is each and every week. So, Dr. Wiseman, it is evident to me that, you know, there is never a text that you're bored with.
No, not really.
You certainly make them come alive. And I am so grateful for you participating in this with us today. And especially knowing that you're a professor, a wife, a mom, and a senior pastor of a congregation.
Yeah.
So thanks for making time for all of that. I
Thank
wanted
you.
to let you all know that we're working on another, to keep with our theme of female theologians of the church. We're working on another professor who I'm still waiting on confirmation for, but I've invited Dr. Joy Moore of Luther Seminary to be our next lectionary study guide, and I'm waiting on her confirmation. And I've also invited Anna Carter Florence, but I haven't been able to get on Anna's schedule yet. So she'll be hopefully up in the later fall or next year. But again, if you'd like to contribute to these so we can keep offering them, you can give directly on our website, and just make sure you title it Formation. If you need a Con Ed certificate for me, I can send you that. Just send it to bishop@elca-ses.org. And again, we archive all of these on our Formation site at the Southeastern Synod, and grateful for Pastor Michael for all of his work behind the scenes and making this work. You will get an email following up from this with Dr. Wiseman's presentation, as well as the recording of this Zoom. So we wish you all the best as you prophetically preach the gospel, but you know you don't ever step in the pulpit, as she said, by yourself. So Dr. Wiseman, if I could ask you, would you mind closing our time with prayer?
I'd be happy to. I would also just thank you for giving your a Tuesday morning in June when I know there's a whole lot of other things going on. Thank you for that. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious and holy God, you come into our midst by story and image, by prophetic word and compassionate healing. You are the source of all of who we are. You have put a vocation in our heart, a call to preach your gospel. Give all of these folks who've been on today and those who will receive this word in other ways, strength and perseverance, possibilities, imagination, and all that they need to move forward. As a disciple of Christ, sometimes a disciple, but help lead us, oh God, in our churches, our communities, to preach the damn gospel. Amen.
Amen.
Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you all later. God bless you.
Thanks.